and welcome to the very first MVC Tech video tutorial. Today I'm going to be discussing server-side Blazor and setting up ASP.NET identity. Specifically what we're going to cover today is how to set up identity, how to configure your database and log in and register. Once we've done that, we're going to move on and enhance or extend the existing functionality so that we can log in and save additional data against a user. For example, I can imagine that a lot of people creating a Blazor website would want to be able to say, let's say a blog, log in as a user and save a blog entry against that user. The thing with Blazor is that when you set up a default template, all of the identity and user stuff is actually injected in at runtime, so you can't actually see much of that information on the screen. It's sort of a little bit mind-boggling, I guess, for the first time you log in, and it can be a bit confusing knowing what to do. So that's going to cover this here. So we're going to start File, New Project, and search for the Blazor template. Wait for that to load. So the thing about Blazor templates is it's going to give us two options. So let's just give this a name. I'm going to call it Identity Demo Blazor and create that. Yeah, sorry, as I was saying, the thing about Blazor apps is it's going to give us two options, WebAssembly and server app. We're actually going to work with the server app today, but for the sake of disambiguation, I'm just going to briefly explain the difference between them. So with WebAssembly, or WASM, what actually happens is the browser itself has the ability to run code or assembly, WebAssembly, and compile that down. So what happens is you declare your C# in there, and it actually gets turned into WebAssembly and run on the browser. This used to be quite slow, but Microsoft has done a lot of work with Chromium to sort of speed that up. The biggest real difference, though, is that with Blazor WebAssembly, you're going to be able to create applications that don't need a back-end server and can run without connection to the internet. The other option, Blazor Server App, which as I said we're going to be working with today, actually needs a persistent connection with the back-end server, and it uses SignalR for that, which is it creates hubs and it's kind of real-time data that fires back and forth. So it doesn't actually run the C# code client side, it actually does that server side and passes back the results via a SignalR connection. So yeah, let's begin. We're going to change this bit here, authentication, to individual user accounts, and then you get two options: connect to a existing store cloud in the cloud and store user accounts in app. So the storage in cloud actually allows you to connect to the Azure Active Directory B2C and sort of register users and store them against the Azure user directories there. For this though, because I'm running SQL Server locally, we're going to store users in app and then click create. So as default, when this website is created shortly, it'll actually have a connection string to a SQL Server local database, which is independent to the SQL Server instance I'm running here. It would actually create a file against the within the build directory of the solution, and it acts somewhat as a self-contained database, like SQLite, for example. It's a little bit more tricky to work with from my experience, because the doesn't have the security and the fine-tuning abilities that you're able to get within SQL Server, and well, it's just not as full-blown really. So anyway, yep, looks like we're up and running now. So looking at the solution that we've now got, there isn't an awful lot going on. We've got a startup.cs class which sort of registers all of the services and is run when the app initially starts up. Within the areas area, this is where the identity stuff is stored that we're going to be looking at, but you'll notice that there is actually only a logout page and a login partial. If we go into the pages area here, we've got index.razor, pagedata.razor and counter.razor. This is the default stuff that is built into the template. It just sort of allows you to click a button on this counter one and it increments a button. So you can see this little button here, button class, increment count, click me, and then there's some code behind here. So when you click it, it runs the increment count method here, which updates current count by 1. And that there updates. Pretty cool to be able to have C# code within your HTML. That's just the way that Blazor works. So anyway, yeah, compared to your standard sort of MVC app, there's a hell of a lot missing. You can't see any of the sort of manage profile pages or anything like that. That's because when I actually go to build this and run it, it'll inject in all of those pages and the application user classes, etc. Sorry, identity user classes at runtime. So yeah, that can be a little bit confusing. What we can do though is go into the tools menu and, well, actually I'm lying to you there. We can go into the add new scaffolded item menu and then add in those pages which override the ones that are injected in at runtime. So anyway, the first thing that we're going to actually look at here is the app settings.json. This being a .NET Core app, previously that would have been something like web.config or app.config if it was a console application, for example. Here you see your default connection connecting to SQL Server Local DB, as I previously mentioned. That's the SQL Server Compact database. What I'm going to need to do though is set up a new database in my SQL Server database and create a user account that can interact with that. So right, new database. Let's call this identity demo. And now we're going to create a new SQL Server login called identity demo user. Now, because I'm being lazy, I'm not going to enforce password policy, and I don't want the user to change password at next login. So let's just set a nice easy password here of password 123. Password 123. And again, what I'm going to do here is go to user mapping and map that account that I've just created, or I'm creating, to the new table I've just created as a DB owner. In real life, what you'd probably want to do is, once the tables are created, grant, select, update, insert, delete, only to the specific tables that you're actually going to be interacting with, or procedures. But for this, I'm just going balls deep and saying this account can do whatever the hell it wants with this database. Okay, cool. So now we have the database with no tables, as you can see, and identity demo user is attached as a user. The next thing we're going to need to do is update this connection string to point at the database. You could actually keep this as it is and then run the migration commands that I'm about to run with it like this, and it would actually create that SQL Server compact database or attached database, as I mentioned earlier. And to be honest, a lot of people probably would do that because they may not have access to a SQL Server locally or an Azure Active Directory. So yeah, in the essence of saving time, and because I am useless at remembering things, I tend to use this website a lot, connectionstrings.com, just to steal a connection string. So we're going to be using standard security because I set up a username and a password. So straight up just copy out the string here. And we call our database identity demo. So and I believe the user ID was identity demo user, and I set the super secure password of password 123. And of course, because I'm running SQL Server locally, the server is localhost. So let's copy that in. Of course, I actually don't care about showing you my password here because as soon as I finish doing this, I'll delete the user and the database. So yeah, here we go. We've got default connection with the settings I've gone. So the question is now, how does it know to use its default connection for creating the identity database? Well, let's go to startup. So within the startup here, we've got add DB context, application DB context. This is like a standard entity framework DB context, and I'll show you that shortly. And then it says options.use SQL Server, get connection string, default connection. So if you were to go into your app settings and call this identity connection, for example, you'd only need to update that there to identity connection as well. And then it adds the identity user, which is the injected user at runtime, and it's pretty much locked down. It's going to be hard to add stuff to that, and I'll show you how to do that later. Now, let's flick across to the data area and open up the application DB context. So here we have a pretty much empty application DB context, standard entity framework stuff, and it inherits from identity DB context. So that's what provides it with all of the details, so it knows what to create for the identity. So yeah, we're going to leave that alone for now. In order to now create the database, after I've saved this, we're going to need to open up the npm, not node package manager, but the NuGet package manager console. So we go to tools, NuGet package manager console. And what we can do is add a migration initial. What this does is a migration is each time you make a change to your database context or any tables are going to be added into your database. Adding a migration creates the scripts in order to update the database with those and reverse those as well. So if you wanted to step back to a previous migration, it would run the down scripts. So I'll just show you what happens here. So we're now creating our initial migration. Just wait till that finishes. Shouldn't take long. When that happens, we'll actually inject into here a new file. Create into here rather. So here we are. So no changes have been made. But up here we've got all of the tables that we'll be creating for the identity stuff. So you'll notice here that we've got one called up, and then if we go to down, so this is what it uses when you're applying your updates. If you wanted to go to a previous one, it would go through each of the previous migration and apply the down method, so that it removes all the tables to get back to where you were at a specific migration point. Anyway, that's that. So we've done that. We just need to issue the command now in npm update database. So that's running away now, and build succeeded. All being well now, if we refresh our tables, we should see the new ones that have been created. However, something's gone a little bit wrong here, so I'm just going to try and figure out what that was. Okay, so login failed for a user, identity demo user. Must have got my password wrong. So let's sort that out. Let's go into the app settings.json, identity demo user, and password 123. So the identity demo user, that's correct. Let's just reset the password again because I may have fat fingered something. Set it just as even simpler. Password. Okay. And let's see if that works this time. It's always good when you get errors when doing a demo, because right, so we've still got login failed for identity demo user. I probably missed something simple and you're all screaming at me now going, you mistyped something. So identity demo user. Is that spelled right? Identity demo user. Identity demo user. So let's just, this is how I would generally sort this out. I would actually try and log in as that user on here. So identity demo user, and then I'll set the password to password. So we're seeing the same error here, which must mean that I fat-fingered my password again. So let's set it to something again. Processor were already 1, 2, 3. Processor were already 1, 2, 3. I always find it helps me to speak like a baby when it comes to typing in passwords. I have no idea why. Right, let's see if that works now. SQL Server identity demo user. Processor were already 1, 2, 3. So my mind is boggling right now. Let's have a look. Okay. I'm just going to pause for a second now and try and figure this out. Okay, so I'm back again, and as you can see, logged in on the Identity Demo user account. So the actual reason for that was because this is a new instance and I'd forgotten to go into properties and enable SQL Server and Windows Authentication mode. So it was actually only using Windows Authentication. Well, live and learn. So yeah, moving on, we should actually now be able to update our password back to what it was, save that, and run update database. This time we should work. There we go, done. Bish bash bosh, as they say. Let's refresh the tables, or maybe we don't need to. And there we go, we have our users. As you can see, it's actually empty at the moment. But yeah, that's sort of like the basic configuration that is required in order to get up and running. So let's go and see what's happening. Yeah, let's generate a self-signed SSL. So once this launches, I should have the ability to register and log in a new account. But the thing is, I haven't configured a SMTP server, so by default it's not going to work quite correctly with the authorization of the account. It's actually going to just give us a link instead. So yeah, this is stuff it's about. So if you click me, and it just updates that, and then the C# is actually within the page itself. It's pretty cool. Right, so register. Let's set an email of and register. So yeah, it says here using a service to register. You can actually quite quickly, if you use the scaffolding, set up a Facebook or Google Chrome login. You just need to pretty much get a key from Google Chrome or Facebook and just plug it in, and it'll work straight out, and people will be able to log into your account using their Facebook accounts. It's pretty cool, really. It's like OAuth. Anyway, yeah, going to register. If you would set it up properly, it would actually email a confirmation message to you. As you'll notice here, I actually have built-in password security. You can override that in the startup. But yeah, I'm going to need to set a more complex password here. Let's go with the good old password. 123 exclamation mark and register. Not going to need that ever again, but yeah, this is what it's about here. So register confirmation does not currently have a real email sender. You can click on this here, which teaches you how to configure it and set it up so that it really will send emails. Quite an interesting read, but that's using SendGrid. But anyway, this is the link that would be emailed if it was set up, and I'm just going to click here to confirm it. Cool, done. Let's log in with the newly created username. Right, cool, so logged in. Pretty much you can just log out, and if you click on your name, you have your profile, email, change the password, two-factor authentication. This is pretty cool because you can add the Microsoft authentication app to your phone, and straight away you've got two-factor authentication on your website, pretty much zero config. You just need to enter in this little code and personal data with GDPR registration and other countries, I'm sure, which have similar things. you can just download your data, everything that this site has on that user. Okay, so here we have profile, username, phone number. Not much information going on there. So I think that we should add something additional onto this. We're going to add a date of birth field. So let's just log out. Well, actually, just quickly go back to that again, and I want to show you something. So you'll notice here that it's going to the page identity account manage. And if we look into here, we have the pages, identity pages, and there's no manage, it's just account. Like I was saying earlier, it automatically injects them. So stop there. What we're going to do is leverage the scaffolding and scaffold ourselves that page. So right click on that, add new scaffolded item, and from here identity, add. This takes a little bit of time and will allow us to add pretty much any page that exists within the identity for that we've seen, and more besides, so that we can override them and provide our own implementations or styles on those pages, which, to be honest, I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to do that. Once that's actually done, we're then going to need to override the existing identity user and add a new field to it for the date of birth column. But again, as you can see, there's no identity user class here that we can update. Right, here we go. So I don't care about a layout because we're not using one. And if I remember correctly, the page that we were on was account manage index. So just going to add that and our database context. And don't care about the user class. So let's just go with that. So yeah, the way that identity works is if you want to add additional data to the identity user, you need to create an account. Traditionally, it could be called anything, any class whatsoever. You could call it my page user, but the traditional sort of Microsoft way of doing things is to call it application user. This user that you create then needs to inherit from the identity user. So we'll just go ahead and do that shortly. First of all, let's make sure that our new page has been added into the areas. So yeah, here we go, manage index. You can see here the form group item for the phone number and the form group item for the username that you saw earlier, which is disabled by default. So yeah, what we're going to want to do here is add a date of birth field underneath it. So let's go back to what I was just saying. Under data, let's create a new class, and we're going to call it application user. And inherit from identity user. What's that you say? You don't exist. Well, let's add in the using references, which comes from the aspnet core.identity namespace. Cool. So now let's add our new field, public class. Break string date of birth, get set, but it doesn't want to be a string, does it? I'm just being stupid here. Date, time. So, right, obviously we've now inherited application user from identity user. We need to do a few more little tweaks before we can go. So let's start the startup. So soon we've got an error here. Why have we got an error? Is it because we've broken something? Yes, we have. Did I just do that? Partial declarations of application DB context must not specify different base classes. This isn't partial, no. So what looks like happened is somehow two application DB contexts have been created. That is a little bit strange. I'm guessing that happened when we did the scaffolding. I've done this before and not had that happen, so let's just get rid of that one. So yeah, let's just stick with our original one. So the thing that you'll notice I did a minute ago was it inherits from identity DB context, and just pass in and tell it that it's going to use application user as its default identity user that overrides the existing one, and then along the line application user actually inherits from identity user, but with our additional field on it. The next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to start up and tell it in a couple of places here to use the application user account. And here. Sweet. So we're all almost pretty much done now. The final little piece of this puzzle is that the pages may reference or will reference the application user account because that's the default functionality of this. So under manage index.cs HTML, let's go into the CS beneath it, so index.cs HTML.cs, which is the code that runs behind the index page. You can see here that it has a couple of references to identity user. We need to update that too. And it's going to say, hey, it doesn't exist. Take out our namespace. And now it does. So yeah, replace all instances of identity user with application user. and then going into the index.cs HTML, we can now add, by copying this, input.date of birth, date of birth, date of birth. And because we want the default functionality of a date picker, let's set the type to type equals date, and that will invoke the browser specific date picker. Now obviously we've got red lines under these, and that is because the model that's providing that input is called index model. So let's go back into the index.cs html.cs, and we have the model here, so let's add our new field to it. So that gets rid of that error. The next thing to be aware of is that when the page loads, it's going to need to load in the date of birth. So let's get hold of that then. So var database user equals await underscore user manager dot get user async, and then we're going to need to pass in the user. So that's user with a capital U, not the one that was passed in. Yeah, so we've got the user here. So we don't necessarily need to use the get username async and get phone number async methods, which will independently go and get them. Instead, we can move that beneath. And get them from the user that we've pulled. Finally, and in the input model it then creates, we're going to set the date of birth to be the date of birth that we pulled from the database user model. And of course I don't need a semicolon there. So that sorts out the load async method. Now we've got the onPost async. This is the method that gets called when we post back our data, and we access the fields that have been passed in by using input. Therefore, we can do this. So what it's doing here is it's checking if the input phone number is different to the one that's in the database. Then it saves that individually using set phone number async. But we don't care about that. We're going to do it slightly differently now, because this get phone number async is built into the identity, and we would have to add get date of birth async and save date of birth async separately, but I don't want to do that. So what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to get the user and then just compare the input fields to the one on the user, like that's been done. But then we're going to just save them all in one fell swoop instead of individually like it's been done here. So if the input phone number is not equal to the phone number, then we're going to set the user phone number equal to input dot phone number. Then we're going to do the same for date of birth. Because we're getting the user from the database, we can just say user dot date of birth. Now if the one that's been set on the front end is different to the one from the database, then let's set the user in the database to the one that's incoming. Then finally, because both of these previously used to, well, this previously used to call save async, we're just going to save the whole user back a little bit like this. So var success equals user manager dot save update async. For some reason I thought it was called save. It's been a while since I've done this. And then we're just going to pass in the user that is now modified. So now it goes me to a waiter, and then success should have a succeeded method property, and if we check that, when it succeeded, it will say your profile's been updated. Now, what we can do is, if it's failed, return a nice little failure message. Because I'm lazy, I just copy the syntax from above. We'll throw a notpad method. And we should be golden. Right, so because we've done all the required wiring, we should now just be able to go into NuGet Package Manager, create a new migration, add my and let's call this date of birth, and then update it, and we should see our new field happily sat there in the database. So yeah, before we run the update database, we just need to make sure that every instance across the entire application where it references IdentityUser is replaced with the application user. The main places we're going to find that are here. So, well, basically in the pages. So just need to go through them all and make sure that they've all been replaced. So here in Manage Nav, you can see that I've added in the using statement and it allows that to work, because previously it didn't have it, and doesn't reference it, so you'd get build errors. So you need to do that in manage nav. View imports is fine. Index.cshtml is also fine. Manage nav pages is fine. Logout.cshtml actually does need it, so you need to reference the using identity demo blazor.data. There's actually login partial as well, which will here twice, but there's actually 2 login partials that you'll need to do that in. These guys are all fine. Can close that. Under the pages here, we should have the second login partial, which also references it. That needs to be removed. Layout's fine. Validation scripts is also fine. I think that's pretty much it. The only other files I can possibly think of is the startup stuff, but I've already done them, so it should be fine. Right, so we can now issue our update date of birth command. If you run the verbose flag against it, it actually outputs data showing what's going on. It's useful if you're ever having errors. So now we should be able to refresh the table and see that our date of birth column now exists. Brilliant. So we should be able to fire up the application and make sure that the new field is working and saving. While that's loading, it's quick. While that's loading, I'm just going to go into the code behind for the manage index page and stick a breakpoint in the load async and post async, just so we can see what's happening. So I'm going to register. Because I deleted my database before I rebuilt it. Okay, so we're loading up the manager page. So let's step through this F10. So pull out the DB user from the database. And you can see that the date of birth field is currently at the date of birth, well, the date time dot min value, so 0001. Okay. So now what we should be able to do is set a date of birth. So now we're at the on post async page and pull the user from the database. Again, it's still going to be the old date. Check the model state's valid, and it is. Get the phone number from the database. So the phone number is that, and the old phone number was empty, so it's going to update the user from the database phone number to be the one that's just come in. Now, date of birth again, old one, and the input one is the new one that I just selected, 23rd of June 84. So it's going to update that, and data sync the user that we've got to the database, and it succeeded. And now we refresh the sign in, say it's been updated, and return back to the page. And there we go, our date of birth has been updated. We can just double check that by going back into here, and still saved. So that pretty much just covers how to modify your IdentityUser account. The only thing really to add is that you'll probably want to add more complex data to the IdentityUser, such as a whole new object, let's say a blog post item, or blogs, or maybe even, I don't know, if you're making a game, let's say player characters table, you'd do that in the database context by adding a public virtual object to that and using fluent mapping in the DB context to set that and update the database. But that's kind of out of scope of this video. Well, thank you for watching. Sorry it dragged on a bit, and hopefully I'll do another one again soon. Cheers now.